Hi, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. We are very excited about today's episode. We welcome Warren Sharp to the show for the first time. Warren, how are you?
I'm doing great. We got football here in about 48 hours. Just been jacked up for it, ready to roll for months now, it seems. I mean, it's a long time coming, but certainly happy that it's here. And news Fast and Furious coming out today for different players and their place on depth charts and things of that nature. So it's busy already, but happy to join you.
The grind never stops. I wanted to send a special shout out to Joe House, who made all this possible. They say it's a relationship business. I've known Joe for 4 or 5 years now through the podcast, and he reached out to you. So big up to Joe. How did you meet Joe?
Well, I did the Ringer gambling show
Yeah.
with Joe like several years ago. We did that for multiple years. Actually, Joe was just at my crab feast on Saturday, just a few days ago. So Joe and Danny from the Ringer, fame, were over there. It was a lot of fun. I love Joe. He's a great dude. Loves betting on games. Loves talking about betting on games. So he's a lot of fun.
I guess 2 bushels of crabs. What was the number?
62.
62 bushels.
No, 62 bushels. 62
No.
crabs shoved in.
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
say it was a large bushel, extra large bushel, something along those lines. I don't know exactly how they sell it or package it, but they crammed a ton in there. And there's a handful left over afterwards, but everybody ate to their heart's delight. I love that every year we do that. Pretty much to close out the summer is we have Jimmy's Famous Seafood, which can't recommend those guys enough. If you're ever in the Northern Virginia, Baltimore, DC area, it's a quick trip over there. They have the best crabs that I've ever tasted. They also ship, internationally, nationally. You could get their crab cakes, which are delicious as well. So love those guys. They always hook it up each year, and we invite people just drink all day, pick crabs. And if you're not from the East Coast, you maybe don't know how fun that is, but just sitting around picking crabs and drinking beer for hours while football's on in the background and you got some friends around is one of the most relaxing, enjoyable things that you can do.
I concur. Let's see. First time on the show, we like to meet folks and get to know them a little bit. How is it that you got here as really one of the more respected minds in the space right now?
So it's a long journey, but it started with when I was in college working to develop a computer algorithm to forecast who's going to win games better than the odds makers out in Las Vegas were doing. And so I spent years developing this. Then I started posting the predictions ahead of time on message boards. And at first it was just fantasy football message boards because there were no that many sports betting message boards. Eventually I started posting on sports betting message boards as well. Got a following and had some very influential people in the space who kind of troll those message boards looking for people who do a great job. One of those guys contacted me. He's like, you got to come out to Vegas. My group's interested in meeting with you. I went out there, started working behind the scenes professionally with some of the biggest and most influential sports bettors on the planet, giving them information, continuing to get my hands on more and more data to get the results even better. Started getting my hands on play-by-play data. And once I got my hands on that, then the universe sort of exploded. I started writing a lot more. I started writing on a blog. I started sharing more information. And then a couple of the teams found out about me through some of the stuff that I was publishing and some of the people on Twitter where I was typing up, some of my analysis, publishing it. Those people would then retweet it or share it with some influential people behind the scenes. Started working as a consultant for a couple of different NFL teams, met with different NFL, whether it's coaches, head coaches, or offensive coordinators, developed a good little core of guys that I sort of assist and help. And then just it's always a pursuit of how much data can you get, determining which data is valuable, what you don't have to look at quite as much, being able to make decisions based upon smaller sample sizes of data. Because if you're a real, mathematician, if you've been studying statistics for a long time, the sample size in the NFL is going to freak you out and you're not going to be interested in trying to make decisions or any type of conclusions from such small sample sizes of data. But if you can figure out what data you could utilize in a smaller sample way, that's what the NFL teams are doing each week when they're game planning for their opponents. Week 2, teams are going to look at what team their opponent was doing a little bit week 1. Week 3, they're going to look at what they did week 1 and 2. You don't necessarily have, 2 years worth of data to try to uncover something. You have to make a decision based upon a very limited sample of information. So, that's sort of how I got my start. Obviously, I've been writing this book, which I got a copy of it here, the 2025 football preview book. This is 585 pages of analysis. I put this together every single year. It takes months to do in the off season. But yeah, that's pretty much how I spend my summer is working on this. And then when I'm done, go on vacation, clear my head, get ready for a long, busy grind that is the NFL season.
Your team sent me a copy. I was going through it. It is not a football preview. It is a football opus that you do every year. 580 would stack up there alongside some of the biggest and deepest novels, if you will. Each team gets almost 11, 12, 13 pages. What was the concept? What was the theory behind doing it like that? There are so many that come out that aren't nearly as detailed. It's got to be an unbelievable endeavor.
It is. The way that I started doing it, first of all, there's certain statistics that you want to put on for every single team. You want to know how they're performing on first down, second down, third down, different situational spots. So there's pages within the book that for every team, you can go and look at where certain teams rank statistically. So that's like built into like the framework of all the chapters. But then there's the narrative. I call it the narrative, what I end up writing. And I know that there are some publications that do it differently. They assign, certain individuals to write about these teams or those teams. I write the narrative for every single team, all 32 teams, because that's the only way that I can actually get a read on how they stack up one another. Otherwise, you're just in an echo chamber worrying about one team. You don't really know how that compares to all the other teams that you're trying to forecast for this upcoming season. And then I have like my fantasy expert, Rich Rebar. He writes the same type of fantasy analysis and recommendations on all 32 teams. I have a college expert, a scouting expert, who writes the analysis on all of the draft class and tries to compare all the different draft classes for all 32 teams. So we find an aspect of football that somebody is a specialist at, and then we have them write about all 32 teams so they could get a good sense as to what they need to, how they're going to stack up league wide. And that is what actually takes the most amount of time. Me writing the narratives for each of the teams is days for each team, because I'm trying to go back and look at what they were doing last year and why that's going to be different this year. Like what results are we going to see this year? But in order to do that, I have to understand what their goals were last year, what they were trying to do last year, offensively and defensively. Did it work? Did it fail? If it failed, why did it fail? If it worked, will it be successful again this year? Or was it working because of luck or other factors that get baked into it? Which is why I reject the premise that John Madden came up with. You are what your record says you are. I don't believe that to be true whatsoever. Wins and losses are at times very random. End game scenarios, turnover differential factors in very heavily towards winning or losing a game. It doesn't necessarily mean that that team is a great team or a bad team just because they won a particular game or lost a particular game. And so that's why I have to find out if a team that had 11 wins last year was actually good, or a team that had 7 wins last year was actually below average, and then try to anticipate the coaching changes, the players they drafted, the players they signed in free agency, how that's going to mesh together for this upcoming season. So it is absolutely a big time labor of love, but it is the way that allows me to get focused on this upcoming season in a way that probably, if you were to just read this book, you're going to get a big edge on your competition. But I have to do this amount of work if I'm going to have success to start the season. Week 1, hit the ground running, have a good opportunity to be accurate on the futures recommendations, this team over their win total, this team to win the division, this team to go under their win total, this quarterback to rush over his rushing yards, this quarterback to pass under his passing yards, these types of things that I'm betting in the preseason for the upcoming season. It's my work that I put in that ends up making those predictions more accurate. So I wouldn't trade it for the world. I absolutely love doing it. But I won't lie. There are certain days and certain times of the process where it's just a real big grind. So
we had Rich on last week. He's fantastic, by the way. It's interesting, Warren. The college coach's job is to win football games. The NFL coach's job is to win football games. The two games are similar, but totally different. I guess what I'm getting to is, do we have a quarterback problem and how do we fix it?
Well, I think it's all just about coaching and trying to put these guys in the best position possible. I don't know enough about the development at the youth level and the 7-on-7s and what's helping these guys develop or what's hurting them and what's holding them back. But I do know that I believe coaching matters a lot more than it gets credit for mattering. I know it's all about the Jimmies and Joes that are out there on the football field, but in my opinion, most people don't see the amount of impact that a play caller, a strategy has behind the scenes to help a player excel. And they're never going to. I mean, most people obviously don't work for teams, don't talk to coaches on a daily basis. They don't know what goes into it or the strategies and the thought process there. There's obviously a lot of coaches that do a great job and there's coaches that do a poor job. And, but you're never going to separate truly your quarterback from your play caller. So we don't know exactly how brilliant brilliant Patrick Mahomes is because he's paired with Andy Reid. Now, Patrick Mahomes seems like he's probably the best quarterback who's ever played the game, but we're not sure where he stacks up if instead of Andy Reid drafting him in the 2017 draft, I think it was, he doesn't go down to the Miami Dolphins and Adam Gase drafts him. And then Adam Gase is working with him. And maybe he keeps Adam Gase employed for a while because Mahomes is brilliant. But Adam Gase holds the ceiling down on what Patrick Mahomes would otherwise be calling plays for him. So there's so much that goes into it with just who your play caller is. But I'll give you an interesting example for the 2025 season that I can't wait to watch is, I've talked about this a lot this preseason, but Trevor Lawrence working with Liam Cohen. Trevor Lawrence, the last 4 years, has been working with Doug Peterson. And prior to that, I guess maybe 3 years with Doug, a year with Urban Meyer. We know that Trevor was billed as this generational talent who's going to change the position. He's a prototypical quarterback who is playing really well and should change the position, redefine the position. And he's done nothing of the sort. And he's really fallen short of expectations. But we will see what ends up happening this year now that Liam Cohen has got his hands on Trevor Lawrence, because what Liam Cohen did, at least for Baker Mayfield, was drop that target depth down dramatically to increase the completion rate, to reduce the pressure rate, and to increase the yards after the catch by those receivers. I'm really interested to see how that plays out for Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence averaged 9.4 air yards per attempt last year. That was the third highest of any quarterback in the NFL. He's terrible under pressure. If Liam Cohen lowers that, I mean, Baker was around 7 air yards per attempt, if I recall, 31st or 2nd in the league. That's going to allow Trevor to get the ball out of his hands quicker. And it's going to give more opportunities for the receivers after the catch. It's going to help the offensive line from a pass blocking perspective as well. So these are just little things from a coaching perspective that, while I was selling the Jaguars because I didn't believe in Trevor Lawrence in years past, I'm now more inclined to support Trevor Lawrence and to support the upside of this offense and to be backing Trevor Lawrence, to consider him to be able to throw over 22.5 passing touchdowns, because they're going to throw the ball a lot more frequently inside of the 10-yard line, and nearly 50% of all passing touchdowns come from inside the 10-yard line. I think he's going to complete a lot of passes, so I'm betting some of his props over on completions. I think some of his receivers, like Brian Thomas Jr., are going to catch more touchdowns because I think they're going to be throwing the football there. So it plays into like all the different positions, but that's just, from a coaching perspective, I think it matters a ton. And that's the simple case where you could take a quarterback who was billed really highly, hasn't lived up to their expectations. Is there a quarterback problem? Well, we'll see if it's a coaching problem as it relates to Trevor Lawrence. And then we'll see through some of these other quarterbacks, is some of this just a coaching process? Because we know defenses are playing differently now than they were a couple of years ago. 5-6 years ago, they weren't playing as much too high, taking away the big splash plays, forcing quarterbacks to get rid of the ball quickly underneath on time. Offensive coordinators had to adapt a little bit. Defenses gained a little bit of an upper hand here over the last couple of years since that COVID explosion in 2020, where road teams and home teams, everybody was scoring points. Things have really been dialed back a lot on that side of the football, and I'm interested to see that adjustment by offenses.
Liam Cohen gives the Jaguars a bigger boost, or it's a bigger loss for the Bucs?
I think Liam Cohen gives the Jaguars a bigger boost because I'm down on what Doug Peterson was doing there. Sure. I think the Tampa Bay, it's going to be interesting. I don't know yet enough about their new offensive coordinator, Grizzard, in terms of what he's going to want to do on a regular basis. I'm curious to see. Sometimes I've seen first-year offensive coordinators and play callers come in with a defensive-minded head coach, and the offensive coordinator's creativity and desire to be aggressive gets stunted a little bit by that defensive coach like Todd Bowles trying to make it so that we keep Baker Mayfield from throwing interceptions. And the way he knows to do that the most is to just reduce the pass rate. And that was one thing they talked about in the offseason is Todd Bowles was like, we don't want Baker throwing as many interceptions this year. Well, that's a scary thing to just go out and say with a new offensive coordinator. Will that offensive coordinator just increase the run rate? I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out because he's trying to keep his job. He wants to keep his head coach happy. That's the guy who employs him. So I think there's going to be some big question marks, but the team offensively, once they get worse back, particularly, it's fundamentally a very good offensive line. I think Baker Mayfield fits in well there. They need to get some of the receivers healthy. Bucky Irving was just a gem that they acquired last year. I think there's a lot of talent and upside, plus the conference that they're in, the NFC, plus the division that they're in, the NFC South. A little bit easier of a division, more winnable games. I think the Bucs are going to be relatively fine. I just think the Jaguars are going to get that bump a little bit more than the Bucs lose from having Liam Cohen leave.
What's the best division in football this year?
I think it's hard not to continue to believe that the AFC North is up there in that argument. I like what the NFC West is doing, but I just have question marks as to whether Matthew Stafford's back is going to hold up. But I do think the Arizona Cardinals are going to be better this season to keep things more competitive. I don't know that the ceiling on like the Cardinals or the Seahawks is as high as, like, for example, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens, then the Pittsburgh Steelers added Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that's as big of a bump as some people are some people are making that out to be, like this massive difference. I think it helps, but not that dramatically. But they've got like a very bad fourth place team and three teams that are higher from a ceiling perspective than I believe the NFC West has. But I do like the NFC West. I think that's a strong division. And then it's just going to be fascinating. I don't know about the NFC North in terms of Ben Johnson, his departure to Chicago, how that impacts the Detroit Lions offense. Detroit Lions offensive line lost a couple of players as well. How much Ben Johnson can raise the ceiling year one with the Chicago Bears. How good, like to your point earlier about coaching, how good is Caleb Williams? We know that these quarterbacks tend to take a step in year two. Year one was certainly another very big disappointment akin to Trevor Lawrence, who we talked about earlier from Caleb Williams. How well does he play in this new offense that's going to utilize a lot more under center work, a lot more play action work than what he was dealing with last season? Does he adjust and gel well to that, or does it cause problems as he's turning his back on the defense? So these are some questions that we're going to see answers to very soon.
How do you see the NFC East playing out?
Well, I think that Dak Prescott, it's pretty funny to me that a quarterback who's being paid that amount of money is only going to be receiving such a low win total. If you look at that win total of just 7.5 games, there's no reason a quarterback like a Dak Prescott, if he's worth that salary that they paid him, should be winning only 7.5 games. I don't know what we're going to see out of the Dallas Cowboys from an upside perspective. You got the Commanders and the Eagles, and that's pretty much what it comes down to, at least in 2025, because the New York Giants, while they have the best quarterback that they've had at any point in Brian Daboll's tenure with the Giants, whether you go Jackson Dart and he performs better late in the season and they insert him, not performs better, but just like it's time to insert him, or Russell Wilson actually fits with this offense a lot better than what he was fitting in with his prior stops, in Seattle and in Denver and in Pittsburgh, where those offenses, particularly Denver and particularly Pittsburgh, a lot more heavier personnel, throwing the ball to tight ends, throwing the ball over the middle of the field. And now we're going to see the deeper shots down the sideline, a lot of wide receiver targets, a lot more 11 personnel. This suits Russell Wilson a little bit better than what he's had in some of his prior stops. So will we see a better Russell Wilson? Will he still be massively limited by the offensive line, because he is horrific when he's under pressure? So I think there's some there's a little bit of time that we're going to need to see from the New York Giants, but at the same time, Brian Daboll, will the staff have, will his front office have patience to deal with that? That's to be determined. And will they ultimately have the opportunity to let him continue to work with that team? So I'm not big on the Giants' upside this season. It's a two-horse race there, in my opinion, between the Commanders and the Eagles. Not really going out on a limb there, but that's just how I view the division.
It is a Commanders podcast, so we'll get to them. Big improvements on the offensive line and defensive line. They went out and did that on purpose, obviously. They added Trey Amos to the secondary, which to me makes it one of the deeper position groups on the team. Last year, obviously, they set historic records in a whole bunch of things. One of them was fourth down. I thought it was interesting as I was going through your book. They actually were like historically good on fourth down, but they had more fourth down opportunities the previous couple of years, which I thought was interesting. One thing that I think will keep the fourth down accuracy high, certainly probably not that high, obviously, is the legs of Jaden Daniels. He accounts for so much of that. So how do they kind of, knowing there'll be regression in some of these things, where are the areas in your mind that they can close the gap after that?
Yeah, well, the interesting part is Jaden Daniels has those legs, but he didn't even use them on fourth down. They did not have a single quarterback sneak on fourth down. Now, he had a couple of scrambles, but in terms of a designed quarterback sneak,
right,
they didn't use that. So if you're talking about how could they close the gap potentially, yes, they're going to lose from an efficiency perspective on fourth down. They're not going to be converting 87%, 86% again in 2025. It's just not possible. However, they might be able to utilize some of Jaden Daniels' legs in the quarterback sneak opportunity. I don't know what their plan is there. They didn't do it at all last year. I was shocked when I went back to try to research how the Commanders were converting so many of these fourth downs to see that they didn't have a single quarterback sneak. So they're going to have to just be more efficient on early downs if they're getting stymied on fourth down more frequently. Because if you're stymied on fourth down, and like you noted, I wrote in the book, people remembered Dan Quinn as like the gambling man, going for it on all these fourth downs and whatnot. It wasn't that they were going for it more frequently. It was just that they were converting them more often. So it was paying dividends for them to go for it. But from a volume perspective, it's not like he was just going for it every single fourth down left and right, like Ben Johnson was and Dan Campbell were doing up in Detroit like a few years ago. Like every single thing was a fourth down, go for it opportunity. So when they fail on those fourth downs, that's going to take points off the board. Obviously, it's a turnover on downs. The other team gets the football. So you have to figure out ways to stay out of fourth down more frequently by being more aggressive on early downs and more efficient on early downs. I actually like some of the things that they've done just in the last, 4 months to help give them that opportunity to be more efficient on early downs. One of which is you jettison Brian Robinson. Now, obviously, Brian Robinson, great story in his ability to come back, but he's not an efficient early down running back. He is a maybe a decent short yardage guy, but not efficient on early downs. And this is where the potential upside of Bill coming in there and maybe Chris Rodriguez a little bit, they're going to have to figure out what they want to do. That's going to help a little bit on the early down runs. Then you have Deebo Samuel, who is that quick outlet for Jayden Daniels, who's going to, I think, have a very similar role in DC as he had in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan. A lot of offensive coordinators might not have the utility for what Deebo Samuel is right now in his career, because Deebo Samuel is not the type of downfield receiving wide receiver 1/2 threat who's going to be run. He's close to the line of scrimmage. Get open quick, throw him the ball underneath, let him make yards after NFL and yards after the catch year after year after year after year. This is where he excels. Some offenses don't try to produce that as much. Cliff Kingsbury is going to produce that. It's going to fit really well in this offense. And then, of course, you have a new left tackle in Laramie Tunsil, who hopefully will be able to keep Jayden Daniels upright, give him a little bit more time in the pocket to throw the football, to attack a little bit more creatively down the field. So I think, all things being considered, the Commanders are in a decent position to not regress nearly as much as they otherwise might. But I still think that they have a very difficult schedule, and they're going to be dealing with, they had a lot of success against some very, very bad quarterbacks last year. The one thing that is not really repeatable, but it is something that can be coached up and taught, is the takeaway game defensively. And that's what Dan Quinn did his 3 years in Dallas that helped get him the head coaching job in DC, was this ridiculously aggressive, creative defense that would force a lot of sacks, a lot of fumbles, a lot of takeaways that then put up points on the board. And the Cowboys were consistently plus 10 or more in turnover margin year after year after year, leading the NFL in that regard. Last year, the Commanders were 23rd. They did not force nearly enough turnovers from their opponents. They got to get a little bit more aggressive in that regard, because I don't view their defense as, a top unit. And from a personnel perspective, it's lacking. And the one way you can compensate for that is by getting takeaways. And so you got to figure out the ways to pressure those quarterbacks. You got to figure out ways to play aggressively so that you can get some more takeaways this year.
Obviously, the Commanders are looking up at the Eagles in the division. With all the additions we've talked about, Warren, did they close the gap at all with the Eagles in your mind?
Well, I think the Eagles, I don't know that the Commanders closed it themselves moving up. I don't see them winning, 12 games. They might be a slightly better team offensively next year because they're more consistent. They relied so much on variance, as you know, like one game score variance, fourth down variance, things of that nature. They might be a better team overall. Jayden Daniels year 2 with Cliff Kingsbury. They got lucky that Cliff didn't leave. So stability there from a play calling perspective. Add that left tackle, upgrade the running back room, add a new wide receiver, your number 2 weapon there. So from that respect, they're probably better personnel wise. I don't know that they're going to win more games though. The way they close the gap in terms of wins with the Eagles is just that I think the Eagles are inevitably going to regress a little bit here. I don't see the Philadelphia Eagles being as dominant on all aspects of the ball as they were last year. They had one of the very best defenses in the NFL last year. And I think that was really what helped propel them to winning the Super Bowl. A lot of people look at the offense and Saquon Barkley's addition, but to me, it really was Vic Fangio and the way those defensive players played together. They had a couple of departures on that side of the football that they're going to have to look to replace. But this offense, now they've got a new offensive coordinator as well. So how does that impact the success there? It feels like Jalen Hurts every single year, literally doesn't feel. It is the way that it's been, is dealing with a new offensive coordinator. What we saw Brian Johnson was terrible a couple of years ago. Then we got Kellen Moore in there, who is solid. How well is he going to get his play calls and the offensive design and the desire to be aggressive from his current offensive coordinator? And how well can the Philadelphia Eagles try to lead games and jump out early in games? So I think there's going to be some regression from the Philadelphia Eagles this season that's going to bring them closer to the Washington Commanders, which is why I do think that there's a little bit of a great budding it's a division rivalry, but in terms of both these teams are good. And, years ago, like the Eagles were always stomping on the Commanders, and before that, the Redskins. And so, now it hopefully is a little bit closer rivalry, and, the Commanders can continue to steal some games from the Philadelphia Eagles. And maybe at one point they overtake them, but it's going to be really hard just how well Howie builds through the lines. He's got a great quarterback, and the NFL didn't outlaw the tush push. So it's hard for me to say that the Commanders are going to leapfrog the Eagles if the Commanders have no version of tush push. They don't quarterback sneak at all. And you got a Philadelphia Eagles team who's like, get me into 3rd and 1, get me into 4th and 1.5. We've got a play that's going to work at a really good rate. And it's not just that, it's that they're so willing to use it. Like their 4th down go rate and their desire to just go for it at any point in time is much higher than some of these other teams that don't have a play that they trust as much. And they're not going to want to just continuously sneak their quarterback out there. Just, I call it like a naked sneak, but just a normal old school Tom Brady, Drew Brees type sneak. And those guys were great at it. And more teams need to utilize that strategy. But there is a safety aspect here where the way that line pushes Jalen Hurts, he's not the one risking as much on those sneaks. The linemen are going down and Jalen Hurts doesn't get hit as much. You go back and watch some of the Tom Brady, Drew Brees sneaks. I mean, these guys are getting their clocks cleaned sometimes by defenders because they're jumping over the top or diving by themselves. And it's a little bit more risky in that regard.
One last one before we get out of here. Have front offices contacted you about joining, and have you ever considered joining a front office?
Specifically, there was one several years ago that was interested and made an offer. But the fact was, in my career and the other opportunities that I had, it just wasn't the perfect time for me to do that. As a lot of people I'm sure know, I'm on the sports betting side of things too. And sports betting was just getting started to take off, and legalization was happening in the United States. And there was a lot of opportunity from a sports betting perspective. And to extract myself from social media entirely, to go work 365 somewhere else, uproot myself and my family and go there, work 365 for a coach who could get fired in a year or two. And then you don't know what you're going to be doing after that point in time, which inevitably that's what happened with the group that was looking to, I interviewed with the head coach, I interviewed with the general manager, I interviewed with the ownership as well. But that was something that I just not necessarily thinking that was a top priority of mine with the other things that presented itself. Now, eventually, once I'm done playing, sports betting is a ridiculously time commitment. It's a ridiculous time commitment. There's a lot of stress involved. You got so many things that you're doing. It's very much, you said, some podcasting and just general business, relationship business. That's what sports betting is a ton. Trying to maintain all of those relationships while working your ass off. It's something that you would want to retire from earlier rather than later, if you possibly could, doing what I do, which is originate. And so at that point in time, maybe it would be a lot more fun to just join a staff and help in that regard. But it's not something that, at least for the time being, I still got several good years in me. I'm still doing really well, still beating the closing numbers left and right, still winning betting sports. And so as long as that continues, I'm going to continue doing it until I get a few years older.
Warren, this was a real treat, and I appreciate you giving me some time today. I know you're super busy as the NFL gets closer and closer. Love to do it again sometime.
Hey, thanks for having me, Doug. I got to ask you, obviously, Commanders expert on your end. This is your Commanders podcast. What do you think heading into the season, just a couple days away? What is your expectation of this team? Where do you think they net out from an NFC East perspective and then a playoff perspective?
I think they're second in the NFC East. I like them at 10. I think you mentioned earlier, the biggest thing for them is they brought the entire staff back, which I think is huge. And I'm interested to see how long the experiment Adam Peters is doing with this. They're not really rebuilding on the fly. I think this is interesting. 9 picks last year, half of them hit, let's say. 5 picks this year. Looks like all of them will make it, and only maybe Madrano is only a special teams guy. Hitting all of them with less picks, I think, is interesting. And what do they do with Debo? I think, I think they'll score more points than they did last year. And I think it'll be interesting to see, do they ask Jaden, can they get Jaden to not be the leading rusher on the team this year? Because I think inevitably that's what they want. But at the same time, you're not trying to take away what makes the kid special too. So I'll be interested to see how they kind of shift that and get him more opportunities for explosives and not rely on his legs. And again, to your point, how many games of those were 1 point, 3 points, like that? Everything bounced right last year. And as a complete Commandos homer, I fully understand that and understand there's got to be some give and take on this year. But I like 10. I like it's at 9.5, right? I'll take the over.
Yeah. The good news from a process perspective, regardless of how the ball bounces this year and how many games you end up winning, I agree with you. I think the roster is better this year. I think that the future is so much brighter than it was. Think about like the Ron Rivera years, and we don't even need to go before that. But you, from an ownership perspective, from a head coach perspective, who was also the general manager at times, and it wasn't working out well with what he was doing. Now you've got the quarterback, which is the number one most important thing. And you've got a general manager who seems to be focused on the right things, building in the right way. You combine that with a great general manager, and the sky's the limit. So it's a great time to be a Commanders fan for sure. It's justified that the energy around DC is at a peak right now. So
and if you think about it, the one thing I like about Dan Quinn that I don't think he gets enough credit for, if you go back to his days in Atlanta when he was the head coach, like this is not a Rivera guy who doesn't mind winning 15-13. You were talking about Todd Bowles and what they might do there. Like the offensive coordinators, Kyle Shanahan, and the current head coach for Texas, his name's Sarkisian. Like those were offensive coordinators that wanted to go for it and score 40 points a game. That's the same thing Dan Quinn wants to do. He doesn't want to grind you out. He wants to, he wants to score points. And that's what I love about Dan Quinn as a defensive minded head coach. He's still got this mentality that, listen, we're going to play great defense any which way you look at it. I want to score a lot of points.
Keep in mind those Atlanta Falcons years where he was down there and they had a blitzkrieg style of offense where they were going crazy offensively and did really well, and obviously lost the Super Bowl to the New England Patriots there in a great back and forth game, the 28-3. Sorry, Falcons fans game. So no doubt about it, he's got some experience in letting his offensive coordinator get aggressive for sure. So, but thanks for having me, Doug. This was a blast, and good luck this year. Happy to do it again sometime.
All right, appreciate you, Warren.